We open to a pretty fancy apartment, industrial chic, a bit eclectic, plenty of space for bookshelves, and excellent views somewhat marred by a flue for what I presume is an open fire of some kind. I'd give it an 8 out of 10 overall, but that's possibly because I grew up with an open fire and understand the effort involved with actually using the damn things compared to central heating. Anyway, the apartment is owned by a familiar figure. Either that or he's broken in. His name was Reginald Barkley, but under the orders of Admiral Minor Myteknion, a patron of the channel, we'll henceforth be referring to him as the Murdock Muppet. He's invited Deanna Troi, his fellow Next Generation cohort, over for a visit, though with an ulterior motive. See, she's a counsellor, and Murdock can be best described as a bundle of neuroses wrapped up in some skin. Or should that be felt, now he's a Muppet? Deanna's realised it's a counselling session she's here for, though based on past behaviour she'd probably figured that out before she walked through the door. His current obsession is a certain lost Starfleet ship, and his cat, Neelix, will give you a clue if you hadn't already figured it out. From the sounds of things, it's cost him his position in a research project. After a little prompting, Muppet starts to tell her what happened. We're on a simulation of Voyager's bridge, where the Murdock Muppet's trying to find a way to receive a signal from Starfleet Command. The problem is that this isn't what he's supposed to be working on, something that his boss Pete points out to him. After all, a certain Admiral Paris will be here tomorrow to look over their work. As they leave and chat, Murdock uses the opportunity to explain his latest theory for contacting Voyager using the satellite they're working on. It's called the Midas Array, apparently because people in the 24th century don't understand how fucking acronyms work, and it'll be experiencing a science wibbly in 3 days' time. I say this is Murdock's latest theory, as the last one was a complete shit show and cost them 6 months of work. Understandable then that Pete isn't too keen on entertaining Muppet's new idea. He brings him back to reality, though kindly if we're being fair to him, and instructs Murdock that Pete is to do the talking when Admiral Paris arrives. A little later, as Murdock is working while the others have gone home, Pete even invites him back for coffee and to try and hook him up with someone who I presume to be Pete's sister-in-law. The Murdock Muppet takes a rain check and uses his cat as an excuse, but it looks like the main reason is to work on his idea. Well, mostly. The holodeck is here too, after all. Not for another test, but to socialise with the holographic crew of Voyager, or an estimate of them anyway. If memory serves, one of his previous problems back on the Enterprise was a holodeck addiction. Based on the fact that he's sleeping in one of them, our lad would appear to have fallen off the wagon. It's understandable enough that Murdock would prefer to be here, I guess. He's a popular guy, and it's a lot easier to be comfortable in social circumstances when you can just delete the fuck-ups. But you can't run away from reality forever, and it's time to get back to work. Murdock's there when Pete gives his briefing to some assembled admirals. He's telling them where Voyager probably is based on their position when the dock popped over to the Alpha Quadrant and briefed them back in Season 4. The Murdock Muppet struggles to keep his mouth shut when Pete talks about being able to send signals to, but not receive them from, Voyager. Then he gives up struggling and just goes for it. It's a jumbled mess of words, the opposite of how he is on the holodeck, but the message eventually gets through to Admiral Paris, who wants to know more. Pete's less enthusiastic and tries to temper expectations, causing an outburst from Murdock. It's enough to upset all concerned, not least of which the Admiral, and Pete tells a dejected Murdock to piss off home. Back in his apartment, Deanna is asking the Murdock Muppet how he dealt with the rejection. She's also not surprised to hear that he just went to the holodeck to carry on working. He tries to argue that it's not a relapse of his holo addiction, and will give a point here for bringing it up, but she looks as convinced by that as I am before letting it go. Instead, she prompts him to continue his story. The program helps him to think, he says, which is why he's bouncing ideas off the Voyager crew while they fawn over his genius. His idea of using a science wibbly to contact Voyager still needs work, apparently, which is odd, as I was under the impression it was sufficiently sorted when he tried presenting it to Admiral Badparent. Not to worry, though, as he sorted it again with micro-wormhole something, whatever. As he's thrashing out the details in the simulation of Voyager's engineering department, and fucking around with that bullshit tennis ball we last saw in Season 3, Pete arrives to find out what the bloody hell he's playing at. Muppet says it's not what he thinks, and this is just a diagnostic program of sorts. It's not an addiction, and he definitely doesn't sleep in it. Pete's as convinced as both Diana and myself, with the result that Murdock is told to seek professional help and restricted from entering the lab at all. Perhaps having decided that he's got nothing left to lose, he goes to bother Admiral Shitdad at Starfleet Command. It's a bold play, not least of which because socializing with a hologram version of his missing son is a bit fucking weird, but the Admiral hears him out. He's even willing to pass on Murdock's revised plan to Pete for analysis, but refuses to interfere with his choice to remove Murdock. It sounds like a win to Diana, who tells him as much. Muppet disagrees and says he thinks Admiral Dickbag was just making the offer to get rid of him. That's why he wants Diana to step in and say he's perfectly fine, honest. The problem is that he's not fine, and Diana isn't willing to pretend otherwise, a statement that sends Murdock into a rant. She refuses to help him return to work, but she is willing to help him deal with his obsession. In fact, she'll stay around for a few days and work through it with him. All he has to do now is get through the night and resist the urge to break into the research facility so he can carry on working. We're breaking into the research facility so the Murdock Muppet can carry on working. His codes have been revoked, of course, but 5 years of not being able to lock the shuttle bay door have told us how utter fucking dogshit Starfleet security is. One flashy gizmo later and Murdock's inside. He starts up the midst array and it does shiny science things to the wibbly he mentioned earlier. It opens the tiny wormhole he wanted to make, and he transmits a message to one of the 3 areas that Pete told us Voyager would probably be in. Speaking of which, Pete's turned up, and he's brought some mates. Murdock's ordered to surrender, but fuck that noise. He's already knee-deep in the shit, so instead, he orders the computer to switch controls to the holodeck, and runs into the Voyager simulation, with security guys in pursuit. They're about as competent as we've come to expect from Starfleet security, which means he manages to give them the slip almost immediately. Tuvok's nearby, so Muppet asks him for help, and he calls an alert while sticking force fields around the intruders. They call Pete for help, but he can't control the program because Murdock's fucked with it. Still, there are more chumps where they came from, so Pete calls for backup. They find Murdock in engineering after he tries sending a signal to the second place the real Voyager might be. Holographic B'Elanna covers for him while he scarpers, and the 2 new guards receive some holographic pooping, which they safely ignore. It was enough for the Murdock Muppet to get away though, and they report the failure to Pete. Looks like he's figured out that extras are always incompetent, and he comes into the simulation himself. Unlike the security guards, Pete's got an actual plan. If he can't control the holodeck and he can't turn it off, he'll just blow the fuck out of holographic Voyager by kabooming the warp core. Shooting Holo B'Elanna was a touch harsh, but I imagine he's a bit pissed off by this point, so we should probably forgive him. Murdock's made his way to the bridge and manages to fire off a message to the 3rd and final location. Just in time, too, as Pete arrives with a 3rd security team. Maybe the 2nd got lost or something. It doesn't matter anyway, as Murdock's run out of places to send the messages. Before the core can breach, he turns off the simulation and surrenders. Over in the Delta Quadrant, Seven's having a little banter with Neelix, possibly because neither of them have been in the episode thus far and their contracts require it. Bollocks to all that, though, as Seven's found a tiny wormhole and a message coming through it. Up on the bridge, we do a science to it and tidy it up. Getting a message from Starfleet is good and all, but they've only got a few minutes to send one back as the tiny wormhole is breaking down. As Murdock is being led away, Admiral Arsehole arrives to say he's looked over the wormhole idea and thinks it's worth a go. Pete tells him there's already been an attempt and it failed, only to be proven a liar by an incoming message from Voyager. Brief introductions give way to more sensible things like transmitting navigational logs. Murdock reciprocates with plans for a piece of tech that he says might be able to keep them in contact if they can get it to work, the nebulous nature of that statement suggesting the writers haven't decided if this is a good idea yet. We've still got a minute or two before the wormhole closes, so let's hand the mic over to Admiral. You did a terrible job of raising your son and you should be ashamed of yourself. He asks Janeway to tell his son that he misses him, which is a good start, and that he's proud of him, which is a bit problematic for reasons we'll go into during the summary. Still, at least it's something. The signal dies and Pete apologizes to Muppet for being wrong, so I guess we're forgetting the whole breaking into a secure facility thing. I wonder if any of that's going to make it into the official report. It's party time in the mess hall on Voyager, the real one, that is. They're all curious about their saviour, and the doc tells them about his holo addiction and teleportophobia. Pretty sure he's just broken his ethical subroutines on patient confidentiality, but we're celebrating, so fuck it. Seven says the communication thingy he sent looks like it might have merit, but doesn't give a definite time frame for getting it to work. Neelix calls for a toast, and Paris firstly gives one to his father, and secondly to the Murdock Muppet, who they now consider a member of the crew. More celebrations are ongoing in Murdock's apartment, not just for the success of the project, but also because he scored with Pete's sister-in-law. She's called Hope, which is a bit too on the nose for me, but at least she likes cats. We leave them to discuss his new beau, as Neelix the cat proves as disruptive as his namesake. Alright, let's deal with the elephant first. The episode tells us that when the doc got transmitted back home halfway through Season 4, he gave them a precise location of Voyager, and they used this to estimate where it is some 2 years later. All well and good, apart from the fact that it's completely wrong. During the intervening 2 seasons, Voyager's found no fewer than 4 shortcuts. By my estimates, based on the reported time they saved, the cumulative distance covered by these shortcuts is in the region of 30,000 light-years. The 3 sectors pointed out by Pete as being the logical conclusion for Voyager's current position aren't just a bit off. They're about 1/3 of our entire galaxy's diameter away. To put that into perspective, if Starfleet Command was in London, and their guess was Sydney, Voyager would be somewhere in India.
Bollocks!
With the plot completely undermined, let's look at the rest of the episode. It's largely a vehicle for Dwight Schultz, of course, but that's no bad thing. He was the best part of Projections, one of the low points of Season 2 in my opinion, and I've usually got time for an oddball character. Well-adjusted people might make for a good utopia, but they are boring as fuck. Looking at you, Harry Kim. While we're on the topic of maladjusted humans, let's have a chat about Admiral Paris saying he's proud of his son. Normally I'd be on board with that sentiment, as we all tend to like a bit of validation, but it's a double-edged sword here. We've established that most of Paris's problems are born of the unreasonable expectations people in his childhood, mainly his father, placed upon him. When you look at it in that context, Admiral Paris saying he's proud of him plays into that placing of expectation on his performance. Asking Janeway to tell him I miss him and I love him would have provided the same sentiment without the inherent judgment. But then, who knows? These things are often inherited, so maybe Admiral Paris is just being the son his own father raised. Perhaps we should save a seat for him at the shit parent support group, the one we suggested for Tom Paris, B'Elanna and Seven back in Season 5. There are a few nice touches in this one that we should compliment. I noticed that Marquis Chakotay didn't have his Starfleet regulation pointy sideburns. A small thing, but I like seeing when somebody's been paying attention to the details, even if it wasn't applied to all concerned for some reason. Somebody was keeping an eye on the pips as well, so we'll give another point there. Speaking of attire, we should probably finish on the Marquis clothes. Initially, that felt like it didn't gel with the Doc having been in contact with Starfleet Command back in the Season 4 episode Message in a Bottle. In that story, the Doc said he'd told them everything that's happened to this crew. People not knowing that the Marquis were given provisional ranks in Starfleet feels like a pretty big omission. Having thought about it though, there is a potential explanation. The Marquis is considered a terrorist organisation. News that a Starfleet ship had officially absorbed members of a prescribed group into their ranks would be politically uncomfortable. You might ask why that's the case, and it's a reasonable question. If you're keeping track of the dates, then you'll know that the Federation was at war with the Cardigans, as part of the Dominion anyway, when the Doc got back and gave his debriefing. Under those circumstances, who gives a fuck if we upset them, right? But the Federation has a reputation to uphold. We're the good guys, after all. That's what we keep telling ourselves anyway. The knowledge that a Starfleet captain is willing to fully embrace formal enemies rather than merely tolerate them as required calls into question the Federation's ethics and rule of law. From that point of view, sticking a uniform on them is a PR nightmare. Far more sensible then to keep the whole thing as quiet as possible for as long as possible. Any information the Doc gave to Starfleet Command would have been filtered before it was distributed lower down. Once you consider that, then the members of a research facility not knowing that the Marquis had been given provisional ranks isn't simply possible, I'd argue that it's probable. How much of that explanation is down to the show rather than my imagination is another matter, but we're here partly for the purpose of theorizing on things, so in that respect, it's a success regardless. End of episode.
Alright, forget the airlock idea. We don't want to fuck about with having to build one before we can kill Paris, innit? What options do we have right now?
Engineering.
There's no way B'Elanna would let him in there without keeping an eye on him. She knows him too well.
How about the Jeffries tubes?
And risk involving the leopard. Nope, I didn't say it. Jeffries tubes are out. It's not worth the risk.
Okay, what about sick bay? That's got scalpels and other things in.
Yeah, but one of those things is an hologram with the singular job of making people not die.
Fair point. Woof.